What's up, YouTube? It's your boy Steve from Printer Gang Investments, back with another video. And in this evening's video, Josh Brown was giving a warning to dividend investors about the amount of gains they leaving on the table and the underperformance and how it can be a problem. A lot of us in the mainstream stocks, we got to deal with a lot of ups and downs. Like y'all saw what happened today with the Teslas of the world, with the Palantirs, with the Apples, the Nvidias. They had the big down days. And a lot of more conservative investors, they wonder why we deal with these type of swings. We do it for total return. And Josh Brown's
all right, welcome back. The new year kicking off.
Right
A good time now to look at your portfolio allocations. And today, Josh Brown ringing the alarm of sorts on being invested exclusively in one stock strategy. Josh, what's your hot take today?
That's right, Scott. I think this is the time of year where we're hearing from investors who are allocated elsewhere and looking at their returns and wondering why they're underperforming the major indices to the degree that they are. A lot of this is just being in the middle of a bull market. Some would say toward the end of the bull market, but suffice it to say, we've had 15%-ish average annual returns for the S&P 500. The NASDAQ obviously substantially higher. And you find a lot of people who got back into the market after the great financial crisis or sometime thereafter, but they allocated so heavily to the dividend factor that they really missed out on a lot of what else drives market performance. So I am pro-dividend. 75% of companies in the S&P 500 do pay a dividend. But when you actually analyze it as a standalone factor, 54% of the time, it trails the performance of the S&P 500 over all 12-month rolling periods going back 30 years.
You heard my man? He said being exclusively dividend, it just trails the 12-month performance over the past 30 years, man. But what my man's basically saying here is like he said, a lot of stocks pay a dividend. We all own stocks that pay dividends. We own Apple, Nvidia, I think Microsoft pays one, but that's not really the reason we bought it. That's not the main feature of why we bought it. In this era, investing in a stock for the dividend first is starting to become kind of backwards thinking, because like my boy Josh Brown saying in his point, dividends are good, but what matters most is total return. Because like he's saying, a lot of investors got scared during the 2008 financial crisis, and they got in like after that, maybe 09, 010, 11, something like that. And a lot of those investors, they went exclusively dividend because they just saw what happened in 08. Well, unfortunately for them, due to them being scared of, taking any risk in the market, they missed all the big stocks that came out since 08. And we went crazy. That would be what? Continuation of Apple. Apple was going on before that, but Apple, the Amazons, Netflix, Tesla, Google, you name it. If that was your approach, you missed everything and you just underperformed the indexes by just hundreds of percents. You underperformed big stocks by thousands of percents, and leaving that money on the table for the course of 10 or 20 years, especially in your younger years, like your 20s or 30s. Even early 40s, those aren't necessarily the years where you want to be risk off. You want to be risk off more towards your later years in life, like late 40s, 50s, 60s, when you're actually about to retire. When you're younger, you want to take more risks so you can build up and buy those stocks that may not be necessarily growing anymore. You see what I'm saying? But let's let my boy Josh Brown keep talking.
So I think when you look at the way companies are now allocating capital, you go back to 1993, on average, companies use 36% of their retained earnings to pay out dividends. That number's pretty constant. What's changed since 1993 is that the cash used for buybacks has gone from 17% to 71% of all corporate cash, and that buyback strategy is a thing that companies are doing in response to the fact that it's a better deal for stockholders. You're not being double taxed the way that you are when you're paid in dividends, right? Because a corporation gets taxed, then they pay out a dividend, you, the investor, gets taxed. So I guess it's not really alarm bells. It's more just me saying, look, I understand the psychological importance of getting a dividend. You feel like it's some cash being returned. You love seeing it hit your account. Maybe if you're older, you would rather live on the dividends than have to sell stock every year. I understand it all. But with a dividend-only strategy, no Berkshire Hathaway, no Amazon, no NVIDIA, some of these companies that pay dividends now didn't for the first 20 years of their existence. And you lose out on thousands of percentage points in some of the most important publicly traded companies today.
You hear him, man? And it's ironic that Berkshire Hathaway, you know, Warren Buffett, the one who taught a lot of investors about dividend investing, he doesn't even pay a dividend because he knows how to grow the money because he's Warren Buffett. But you hear what he said? A lot of the great companies didn't even start paying a dividend till 20 years in. So you missed the first 20 years of growth on major tech companies, major companies that weren't tech. Like he said, just you left thousands of percents on the table. And another thing he said, companies are starting to fall back on paying dividends as much because they're going the share buyback route because historically it's proven better for investors. It makes sense. As an investor, I kind of would rather the company buy back its own stock, lock up that float, making the shares I got more valuable versus they get taxed on the profit. They pay this little small profit out to me and I get taxed on it. I'd rather you use that money to grow the business.
So
you see what
it's
I'm
not
saying?
anti-dividend.
Let's continue.
It's just be aware that there are huge opportunities in the market to not just focus exclusively on that one strategy.
You want to engage, Belsky?
I sure do. I love you with all my heart, Josh. I do, but I completely disagree with you because I think that when you take a look at dividends, you can't look at dividend yield. You have to look at dividend growth, which we've shown through the way that we manage money. In fact, Dividend Aristocrats, the DVY, was up 12% in the U.S., up 15.5% in Canada. The respective portfolios that we run were up 20% in Canada and 17% in the U.S. Here's why: because we focus on dividend growth. 60% of the portfolio should always be those core names that have never cut a dividend. 30% should be the names that are growing the dividend, and 10% should be the names that are yields above that. If you're buying companies just because of dividend yield, you can, will, and should underperform. That's what you're looking at in terms of the factor.
Now, you hear what he's saying? If you're buying companies because they pay a dividend, you can, should, and will underperform. Now, this dude is a big dividend advocate, and he's bragging that his portfolios did 17 and 20%. We're still lagging the S&P. And for what is the question? Now, there's nothing wrong with buying a stock that happens to pay a dividend. You know what I'm saying? Like Apple pays a dividend. I own some stocks that happen to pay a dividend. But buying a stock specifically based on the fact that they pay a dividend, even the dividend bulls would disagree.
Josh, I don't disagree.
You see what I'm saying? But let's continue.
I don't disagree with respect to the yield part of it and paying the dividend.
Hey, B, to cut y'all, but look at Josh Brown's face. You talking about making 17% a year, 20% a year. Josh Brown is looking at this man like he is crazy.
It's a longer-term fact. And oh, by the way, too, we've had this amazing run in momentum. And as we normalize, again, I've said it before, we're going to be involved in different types of strategies, one of which is going to be dividend growth. Another is going to be value. Another one's going to be small cap. So I think now's not the time to be leaving dividend growth at all.
Josh, I'll give you the last word and we'll move.
I didn't say a word about dividend growth, so I don't have any data on that. I'm talking about the dividend factor, which weights toward high dividend.
Correct.
That's the data that I have.
Companies pay a high dividend for a reason.
We don't disagree.
Companies pay high dividends for a reason,
Well,
right? Because they're not growing. And oh, by the way, you don't want to buy those anyway.
You heard that? Now that is true. Don't mess with them companies with the high dividend. If you is dividend investing, you better mess with them 1%, 2%, 3% type stocks. Maybe 5%, but not really. You got to keep it low because if a company paying high dividend, that's really a red flag.
Because
they're
fundamentally,
doing that for a reason.
Working.
Listen to these boys.
Well, companies pay a high dividend for the most part because their share prices have collapsed. And
Correct.
And usually that's indicative of a disruption risk or a fundamental problem at the company. A lot of companies pay high dividends on their way to slashing the dividend entirely in order to survive. Brian, I think the key thing that I want to get across, when I say dividend investing to the exclusion of all other strategies. If you were to weight based on shareholder yield versus dividend alone, meaning dividend plus buyback, your results, this is not my opinion, quantitatively, significantly better.
Correct.
There's this idea that dividends inherently are less volatile stocks. Completely false. The dividend index has a standard deviation of 18.9% versus a standard deviation of 19.2% for buyback stocks, for example. So there are a lot of misnomers about the dividend theme. My point is, it should not be the only reason why you're selecting the equities that you're selecting.
All right. Yep. Good stuff. Good stuff, guys.
Yeah, man. So, yeah, they said some real things in this interview, man. Just, clearing up a lot of misconceptions out of here. Because, a lot of investors, we get things misconstrued out here. They tell us to do one thing, then in real life another thing happens. And, it's just things have been changing over the years. We've had a lot of growth. A lot of companies are involved in technology. Companies are actually having longer growth phases compared to their peers. Like, look at how long Apple's been coming out with new products versus like a Pepsi. You see what I'm saying? They're lasting longer, growing longer than the previous big companies. You see what I'm saying? So, nothing wrong with buying dividends. But like my boy Josh Brown said, if you specifically buying a stock looking for a dividend in this era, that may not necessarily be the best way to do it. You might want to look like, do I actually like the company? Does it happen to pay a dividend? I look at a dividend personally like a plus, like the VOO gives me a dividend. I think Apple gives me one. A few of my other stocks do. I own, here's a bunch of stocks I need to check. But stuff like Home Depot, that's one I own that gives me a dividend. But I didn't buy Home Depot because it gives me a dividend. I buy Home Depot because I like Home Depot, the company. But anyway, it's your boy Steve from Printer Gang Investments. Tell me how y'all like these, market reaction videos. I'm going to start doing more of these. And I'm going to see y'all in the next video.